Hey guys, Karen here from Blooming Poppies, and I am back to talk about cutting and getting started with your improv blocks. In the last video, we talked about the Framework Quilt. This is my sample here that I created a couple months ago, and this is for my pattern release that will be coming out the beginning of November, so soon. And I want to share with you guys as much as possible about improv and how fun it is to do improv and how not scary it is to do improv, and how there's really very little to be intimidated by. It's just really a process of jumping in, playing with your fabric, having fun, letting shapes form, and playing with color, and just really letting it just kind of flow. So that is what I want to be sharing with you in this video series, and in the videos the short videos that I've been sharing on IGTV. But what I do want to share today is about how to get started with your first block. That's one thing I have not talked about in those videos. So a couple of things. There are, as I talked about in the last video, there are a couple of things to consider. You know, with improv, I think a lot of people have the impression that it's just for scraps, that you're just going to be using your scraps for improv. So, and that is absolutely true. It's perfect for scraps. However, some of us don't have scraps. Maybe you're a beginner. Maybe you've only done a few small projects and you don't yet have a giant, bin of scraps that are overflowing and ready to use in an improv. And it would limit you if you tried to use just the few scraps that you have. So in that case, yardage is perfect. Fat quarters, eighth yards, quarter yards, half yards even, if you're going to do a bigger framework quilt. The pattern, by the way, shows 7 sizes, so definitely no shortage of what size to choose for your framework quilt, and there's a big range as far as what you will need for yardage or scraps. So if you choose to make, let's say, the large size of the framework quilt, a lot of people, even experienced quilters who have a ton of projects under their belt, may not have enough scraps for that. So, do consider that bundles, yardage that you have on your shelves already, that you've just been dying to use, is great. And in the last video, I showed 2 bundles that I put together of yardage that have worked out beautifully. And this is actually what I wanted to share with you today. Using my yardage that I got off of my shelves that I shared in the last video, I was able to create these blocks here, which I'm just absolutely in love with. I cannot wait to finish a quilt with these. These blues and greens were just sitting on my shelves, this yardage, and I was able to take the yardage that I had, and I basically just started with about a quarter yard. I actually didn't even measure it. It was maybe somewhere between an eighth and a quarter yard. And I just cut it. With the fabric wise, I cut it. And then I had giant sections ready to just start cutting into. And it's a little bit scary to think like, oh, I'm just going to cut this yardage without any plan or without any idea what I'm going to do with it. And you just have to let that go and just go for it, because you are going to cut it, and you are going to start to cut it up again into even smaller pieces. And you don't really have a direction necessarily. But we'll get to that later. So what I did though is I went for it, and through those cuts, I was able to create these blocks that I have shared on Instagram, and that I'm just super happy with. And then alternatively, what I did was with my scraps, and in the scrap bundle that I shared in the last video as well, I made several blocks, and these are I love these as well. They're a little more choppy. You'll see I have smaller sections and lots of them. And the reason for that is because I'm using scraps, so I don't have as many of the long strip pieces that I was able to get out of my yardage. With scraps, you're just kind of bound to whatever shape you have, to some degree. Obviously, you can make longer strips, and I will talk about that. But when you're choosing scraps for this particular method, because I'm having you do strips, it's great if you can find scraps that are long, or at least a lot of them. They don't all have to be long, but if you can find several pieces that are long pieces, that's really great, because I personally don't like to have too many of these really choppy sections in my blocks. I think it's it just feels a little bit too much visually, and I really enjoy seeing a lot of long strips together, just to let the eye rest a little bit in the block. So anyway, that's just something to keep in mind when you're going through your scraps, is get those long strips if you can. Those are really great. So to show that, I wanted to share with you, what do I mean when I say long strips? Well, what you want to know before you start your quilt is what size are you going to be cutting your blocks. For this particular framework quilt that I'm going to be making as a demonstration for you guys, I'm going to be cutting my blocks all to 8.5 inches. So I'm going to be needing strips that are about 10 to 12, let's say 10 to 12 inches. Because when they're sewn together, this one you can see I'm going to be making longer. I'm going to need to make it longer. But when they're sewn together, they are going to be longer than I need, which is great, because what happens is I get this offcut section. And again, in my IGTV videos that I've been sharing, I talk a lot about what to do with those offcuts. So, but to get started with your very first block, you're basically going to want to just have some strips. And I like to cut my strips. I actually don't cut them too much with a ruler. I don't worry too much about super perfectly straight cuts. So this ruler I use sometimes, but often I just find myself essentially just taking my piece and just freehand with my rotary cutter. And sometimes they end up super straight, sometimes they don't, it's fine. Often I will on purpose cut them to where one end is larger than the other. If you do that, that's great. You can do that on several pieces, and then you just alternate. Okay, so you have, on the next one, you would have the bigger side at the top and the smaller side at the bottom. And then the next row, you would alternate so that it's the opposite. And that way your block doesn't get out of balance and it continues to go straight. So you can see in this one here how I did that with this block, or this strip. You can see I've got several strips like that. So I purposely cut them, and you might have to, a lot of times you might have to cut both edges, like this one. I would have to cut this one on both sides in order to create that. So you're losing a teeny bit of fabric on both sides, it's fine. But you could also sew it in just straight and narrow, and just like this, and it works as well. So you can see I have some more straight pieces that don't have the angle, some that do. I just really vary it. It's really, there's no huge rule that you have to do it one way or the other. It's kind of whatever you like, visually what works for you. Remembering that as you go, your first few strips might be kind of just really basic this way, which is great. And as you go, you're going to get more of these offcut sections that will then allow you to sort of vary up your block. And I do talk a lot about this in my IGTV video. I actually shared in one of my IGTV videos how to make this strip section here. I think this exact one. So if you want to start from scratch and be making and create a section like this, you can certainly do that too. I would be wary of adding too much of this in your blocks, because you just want to keep your blocks from getting too crazy and visually just too much going on. So for instance, I've made several blocks, which I can't show you now because it would be hard, but I've checked my stories for those. I have made a lot of blocks that have a lot going on, and as I stand back and look at them, I'm kind of thinking, oh, that's actually maybe too much going on. So what I'm going to do now is create more blocks that are basically just more or less just the strips, just alternating strips of color, because I want to throw those in with my more intricate blocks, just in order to give my overall quilt design a place to rest. I want to let the viewer kind of have a place to rest and not have too much happening all in the quilt. So that's just something to keep in mind. Lots of things to keep in mind, but as you go, you're gonna get it. It's gonna just sort of, you just learn all these things on your own creatively about what you want to see in your improv, and that just comes with time. So I urge you to just give it a try, give it a go, dig into those scraps or go find some yardage that you love and just start cutting and just sewing it together. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how to sew the pieces together, how to press, and how to start actually seeing the block come together. If you can't wait for the next video, please feel free to go to my Instagram and look at the various videos that I have shared on IGTV. So I hope you find those helpful, and I hope you'll join me for the Framework Quilt pattern release on November 4th.